Right, Craig is recording. Thank you, Craig. So be careful what you say. It goes on the permanent record. And I also want to start by saying happy Sigd Tov. It's an official holiday in Israel. And I don't know that you've ever heard of it. S-I-G-D, Sigd.
I don't know what it is.
It's a holiday observed only, well, primarily by the Ethiopian Jewish community. Brought it with them when they came from Ethiopia. It's a holiday that, as far as we know, goes back at least 1,400 years, may go further. It's derived from, it's 50 days after Yom Kippur. That should remind you of another 50-day period, right? Does that ring a bell? 50 days after?
Shavuot.
So Shavuot. So it is about the relationship of God and people. And they do read the 10 Commandments on Sigd. They also ask forgiveness. They have a number of elements. And they take it from Nehemiah and Ezra when they returned from captivity of Babylonia. They gathered the people and read the Torah, and had a gathering. And that's a holiday that only they observe. But it became an official holiday in Israel, I think in 2008, if I'm not mistaken. And they observe it on the Cherubs Plaza. Those of you who know, there's this, the Haz Promenade, not named after our cantor, but it's overlooking the old city, a beautiful promenade. And part of it is called the Cherubs, and that's where they observe it. They dress in traditional Ethiopian garb. They do chants and prayers, and it happens to be this day in Israel. And the month of Cheshvan, because it's when it happens, is like African-American month here or Women's History Month. In Israel, it's Ethiopian Culture Month. So just a little information as we begin. So we're going to do mitzvot. I don't know that much of what we do today will necessarily be new to you, but we're going to try and think about it in a more intellectual way than we normally do, more than just talking about mitzvot, what they are and the commandments, but how they really underpin our tradition and are at the core of the nature of what we call Judaism and the Jewish people. Last time we dealt with the issue of peoplehood and land, and where land falls within our tradition. So for instance, today, if we were to look at other religions, world religions, so let me bring, I don't have it here for you, but I do have, I think I have something for me to look at, if I can find it. Yeah. So if the Catholic Church, I went online to see what is actually required to be a Catholic, a part of the church. What does the church require of Catholics? So the first precept is that the church requires that the faithful sanctify Sunday by attending Mass. We know that, right? So once a week, they are required to attend Mass. Second precept is they require that on a regular basis, they repent for their sins, confess their sins. We know that because we remember the famous scenes of the priest in the box and the Catholic confessing sins. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned, right? The third precept is that good Catholics take the Eucharist at least as a minimum on Easter, but they recommend, of course, because of the church service every week. Fourth precept is observing fast days as instructed by the church. And the fifth is to give tzedakah to the church, to give support to the church. Those are the requirements to be a Catholic, right? Those 5 precepts. And if we were to look at Islam, Islam has the requirement of the declaration of faith, faith in Allah and Muhammad, his prophet. And then there are the 5 pillars. The first one is the declaration of faith. The others are more flexible. They have to do with charity, the Hajj, fasting on Ramadan. Those like the Hajj is once in a lifetime, right? The pilgrimage to Mecca is once in a lifetime. Tzedakah is flexible. They're supposed to give it. There are a number of standards. And then they look at the life of Muhammad as an example, just as Christians look at the life of Jesus as an example of how one should live. But Judaism and Jewish people have a much more detailed understanding of what God requires of us. And it's interesting because Christianity, as we know, grew out of Judaism, and Islam grew out of both Christianity and Judaism. And in each case, they required certain things, but they restricted their requirements to a very few. Very few. And in fact, there's a statement in the New Testament that not one who is circumcised of flesh, but one who is circumcised of the heart is the one whom God desires. So being circumcised of heart has to do with faith. Being circumcised of flesh is more painful, right? You got to cut something. And you got to actually do something. You can't just profess faith. And the mitzvah system, which already exists in the Torah, is our system of transmitting our traditions. It's not a system of faith. It's a system of action. Now, none of this should be new to any of us, but what we're going to talk about is what that really means and how it defines us, right? So any comments up until now about Christianity, about Islam, about Judaism? Anything you want to say or ask or argue? No?
Well, you do need to be baptized to be a Catholic.
There is the expectation of baptism within the church, absolutely, and that is a one-time and it is an act. There is no question, that's true. Not in all Christianities, however, right? There are Christianities that require baptism by water, but there are others that don't require baptism by water, depending on which branch of Christianity and which interpretation. Same is true about the interpretation of the Eucharist, what it means, what it actually entails, how it's administered. There are differences, right? And there are differences within Judaism about how we look at mitzvot. But we understand theoretically that mitzvot are, and that actions are required. Okay, so let me go to share. And the first one is perhaps the most well-known of all of our mitzvot.
10 Commandments. Right?
They are the 10 Commandments, right? So let me move, first of all, move you guys over to here. Okay, now. All right, so we can see, we're going to analyze the 10 Commandments for a few minutes. So the first one is the kind of just the introduction. Vaydaber Elohim et kol ha'devarim ha'ela lemor. God spoke all of these devarim, these words, saying, it doesn't say mitzvot. All right. And in Hebrew, they are not called the 10 Commandments. They're called the 10 Mitzvot. They're called the 10 sentences, or the 10 sayings, or the 10 words. So the first one, that is usually labeled the first commandment, but it's a statement. God says, Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. God introduces God's self. I'm the Lord your God. That's both Adonai and Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So God defines God's self to us as the creator of all, but as our specific Redeemer who took us out of slavery. God does not define God's self by qualities other than the Redeemer. God is not almighty, all merciful. God is not all forgiving here. God introduces God's self as having redeemed us. So God is the God of history. Right? God is a God of our history, specifically, history of our liberation. So now we get to one you could call the first commandment, right?
Right.
Lo yeh lecha Elohim acherim al panai, you shall have no other gods besides me. Right? So you, however you're going to relate to me, you cannot relate to other gods, whether they exist or not. Right?
Right.
Doesn't actually say whether they exist or not. Just says, you and I have a special relationship. You can only relate to me as God. It doesn't actually say how you're going to relate to me as God. It doesn't say about faith. It doesn't say about prayer, right? Doesn't say about prostrating yourself. Doesn't say about asking forgiveness. Just says we have this unique relationship. I am God to you, and there are no others. That's why it says lecha, to you, right? You shall have. Okay. Now we get to the first kind of statement about what that might mean to have a relationship to God. And it's in the negative again, just as the other was. It's lo ta'aseh lecha fesel v'chol tmuna asher b'shamayim mima'al, asher ba'aretz mitachav, asher mibayim mitachel la'aretz. You shall not make any graven images, any likenesses of anything that is in your experience, heaven, earth, under the water, nothing. Don't make any likenesses that are for you something that you might relate to as me,
Okay.
as God. It's not talking about foreign gods, right? It's talking about these manifestations that you might use in your relating to me. Don't do it. But
So,
it's it's had various interpretations over the years. We're not going to go into all of them because obviously even among Orthodox, there are pictures of the Rebbe among the Chabad, right?
right.
That old notion that there couldn't be any pictures was not ultimately the interpretation of this in our tradition. But the interpretation was you can't have anything that you worship. That would also has been interpreted as money, right? Cars, things, power, can be all kinds of stuff, but that's more midrash. So far, our 10 commandments or 10 statements, we've had two negatives after God introduced God's self. Now, here we get to what, again, we can't do. These are all negatives. Lo tishtachav elehem, don't bow down to them. Lo tavdeim, don't serve them, these gods, these foreign gods, these idols. Ki, because Anochi Adonai Elohecha. I, the Lord your God. Now God's going to define God's self a little bit. El Kana. I have a jealous nature. Okay, avonavot al banim al shlishim al rebeim l'sonai. Bose chesed la'alafim lo havai l'shomrei mitzvotai. I visit sins that you perform, that is, the elders perform, on their progeny unto the fourth generation of those who hate me, those who don't connect to me. But I will give loving kindness, chesed, to thousands of generations of those that love me and keep my commandments. So here we have a statement that says, what God wants of us is, first of all, not to worship in any way other things or gods. What God wants of us is to do loving kindness by loving and doing the mitzvot. Now, we don't know what the mitzvot are yet, right? We haven't been given the mitzvot. The only mitzvot we have are circumcision. We have a little kashrut, gida nasheh. You can't eat from the sciatic nerve area of an animal, and Shabbat. We have that. We now have Rosh Chodesh, that was given in Egypt, but we don't have all the commandments. But God is saying the way this will work, that we will have this loving relationship, is through mitzvot. Right? That's the introduction. Oh, Joni has a question.
Chesed here, I don't know which translation this is.
Right.
It's translated as mercy. Why wasn't rachamim used instead of chesed?
Well, the translation, Joni asked, why is chesed being translated as mercy here?
That's different than loving kindness.
Right. Chesed is loving kindness. Chesed is love. In fact, I just gave my sermon. My last sermon was about chesed, and it's the whole notion of acting lovingly. It's not just loving, it's acting on love. So God will act lovingly. Why it was translated as mercy, whoever the translator was, that's what they decided. I think they decided because of God being jealous, God would be merciful, but that's not what it says. That's why Hebrew is really important, folks. It's a plug to study with Rabbi Davis, a little more Hebrew. So chesed. Okay, is that okay, Joni?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions until now?
Not yet.
What
Okay,
about the jealousy part? I'm a jealous God.
right. Well, so there we are.
So
So
have no others, in other words.
hina, jealousy, also means intensity or extreme, right? God has an intensity about God. I think we know that. I mean, we see that throughout the Torah, that there are these moments where God shows anger. And remember, it isn't God that's doing it. This is language that human beings can understand. So what we interpret is God's anger. It doesn't mean God is angry or God is jealous. It means that's the way we see God when God does these things that we are objecting to. We see God as an angry God. Doesn't mean God is angry. Remember, it's only human language. We can't really describe God with our language. We just use what we can. And the rabbis knew this. They said that the Torah was written in human language, so the humans could understand it.
Rabbi,
Yes, Marshall?
could we have a little discussion of this God word? Now, I mean, we're not supposed to say it. When asked what it is, it says, "I will be what I will be."
Right.
And yet we have this, I don't, vague isn't the right word, but all of these rules were supposed to be based on something we're not supposed to name. And so what are they based on then? If we can't name it,
Right.
what is it?
Well, that's why we came up with euphemisms for God.
Mm,
You know, in effect, Adonai is a euphemism for God. Rachaman is a euphemism for God. Shaddai is a euphemism. These are words that say something to us as humans. Shaddai means powerful. Adonai means Lord, right? These are words. Rachaman means merciful. We come up with words for God because just like we don't have an image of God, we don't have a name for God. We can't say it.
So how do we know what we're talking about then?
we don't.
Well, we don't. In reality, it's one of the aspects of Judaism. You know, I often come back to the notion, why are there so few Jews in the world and so many Christians and so many Muslims, when both of those religions were sparked by us? Why is that? And part of it is they explain much more. They give you much more. Christianity gives you a figure of Jesus, right? A real figure to talk about. Mary in Catholicism. And then you have Muhammad in Islam. You got a real concrete thing to latch onto. We don't have that. We've got this mystery of God being other than what we can conceive of, in body, in name, in every way. And we have to try and struggle in our relationship to understand what that means. And so we don't even, traditional Jews don't even write God's name in English,
Right.
even
Right.
though the Torah wasn't given in English. And you can see here, if you look at the Hebrew, how it's written. Adonai is written as a hey with a chupchik, and
Yes.
Elohim has a dash,
Yes.
right? I mean, they don't even in the Hebrew write it, and though this translation does write out the name of God in English, right? Safari had decided to do
Can
it.
I say,
Yes, of course. Norm.
thank you.
Make sure,
Um,
Marshall, did that answer for you, or was that?
Not exactly.
With Marshall.
Norman.
Not exactly, because I think it's important to come up with a concept of what it is that, I mean, you know, you talked about redemption, then the next thing I have to talk about is revelation. You know, what is it that came up with these concepts that we all agree are the fundamentals of the way we should behave? Where did it come from? Did it come from outer space? Did it come, I mean, what, you know, what is this? Is this something we just made up? What is this thing?
Well, all of those questions are the questions, you know, that is the issue. This statement is there is a God. Whether you believe in that God is up to you. What you believe in that God is up to you. What you need to believe in that God is up to you. How you relate to that God, in effect, is up to you. Judaism, through rabbinic tradition, is going to define, taking these mitzvot, it's going to define how classical traditional Judaism relates to this entity. But none of it says that this is something you have to do, only that you have to do it to be a good Jew in this framework. But if you want a different framework, I'm a Reformed Jew. I'm a Reformed Jew because I pick and choose what I relate to. That's my core. My core belief is that I choose how I will relate to God. I don't pray 3 times a day. I pray once a day. That's a choice, even though our tradition says 3 times a day, right? I keep kosher, but I keep kosher in a way that some of my Orthodox colleagues would probably say is not strict enough. All right, but for me, it's how I relate to our tradition. It's how I relate to kashrut. It's how I relate to rabbinic tradition and biblical tradition. Ours is a very, very hard religion because we've talked about it. It's about questions and it's personal struggle. It's about personal struggle with faith and with practice. It's not about dictating to someone though there are Orthodox strains that do that. But the bulk of our people don't accept that. That's why 90% are not Orthodox. We don't accept it as a people. And I would argue we never did. I'm going to move on a little bit if you
Oh,
don't.
could I say something?
Yes, Norma.
Thank you. I had heard that the reason there are more Christians than Jews is because they are more definite about heaven. You know, they believe in heaven and we don't, or we're not. I don't know. We don't talk about it.
Well,
Or we're vague.
right. We do have an Olam Haba. We are vague, but we are vague about everything. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
You know, they are more definite about every aspect of religion. They have 5 precepts. Islam has 6. You know, these tell what the faithful need to do. We've got, as we're going to see in a minute, if you've read it, we got hundreds of mitzvot, and that's just the beginning, because the mitzvot then expands. So it says you shouldn't work on Shabbos. We got 39 kinds of work that you can't do. And then of the 39 works, there are subcategories in each one. You know, there's a saying, schwer zu sein a Yid. It's hard to be a Jew. Well, it is hard to be a Jew if you take it seriously. If you don't take it seriously, well, my father and mother were Jewish. I'm Jewish, and I do what I want to do. I eat borscht, and I eat challah, and I'm Jewish, and I light Hanukkah candles, and maybe I go to shul on Yontif once in a while. But okay, that's what I do. But I'm not taking it seriously. But if I take it seriously, it's really hard. I'm reading now a Hasidic master, and this Hasidic master is very interesting. Works are not so much translated into English. It's the Sfat Emet, and he's one of the things he keeps saying is, struggle is how you get to rest. If you don't struggle during the week, you can't have menucha, rest on Shabbos. And if you don't struggle in your life, you don't get rest in the next world. Well, in a sense, he's pointing out something about being serious in Judaism. It's a struggle. And the mitzvah system is at the core of that struggle. Okay, is that all right, Norma? Can I go on?
Yes.
So we finally get to something positive, Zachor et Yom HaShabbat l'kadsho. So the first thing is keep the Sabbath. All right, good. Keep the Sabbath, that's positive. So it says 6 days you do all your labor, but the 7th day, don't do labor. So now we got another negative. Don't labor on Shabbos, right?
Right.
So we go on, and then we got honor your father and your mother, positive. But then we get don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, or don't. It's often kidnap is another way it's interpreted. Don't be a lying witness. Don't covet. All right. So I'm going to go to the second source. This is from the Talmud. Today I'm going to do the reading because I'm trying to explain through this and get us through it, so we can move on. Next week is about intention. How we actually work with doing the mitzvot, our intention. That's a little bit like mindfulness today, right? Intention, kavanah.
That's what Daniel sent us.
Right. So Rabbi Simlai said there are 613 commandments. They were told to Moses. 365 negative, right? Don't do. Corresponding to the days of the solar calendar. And 248 positives, do, corresponding to the limbs of a person. So I'm asking you this question. First of all, he relates the negative time, right? Time. And he relates the positive to our physical bodies. What do you think he's saying about those commandments? Positive commandments, Joni said, are things you have to do. Physically,
Yes,
you have to physically do.
right. And physically could be part of it is the mind. What am I going to do? My choices. Which ones do I want to do?
Okay. Good.
I was thinking maybe just actions, because your body is moving and you're thinking. And so maybe it's related to the body because it's actually physically, you have to do something, think about something, do something physically. I don't.
Well, no, well, you're all, I think, so far focusing on the right thing. How do you honor your father and your mother? You do things for them.
Right.
Rabbis will talk about specific actions you take to honor your father and your mother. How do you keep Shabbat? The positive thing. Well, we have Kiddush, we light candles, we have actions we take, right? Any of the positive commandments, how do you do them? Well, you have to physically be involved in doing something, right? But why does he take the negative ones and associate them with the calendar year, with time?
It doesn't change. It's always the same. Whereas your body changes. There are always 365 days. It doesn't change. So if you're not supposed to do it, you don't do it.
Good. It's good.
Whereas
It's good.
with your body, you're at different stages with your body, and therefore you can do different things at different times.
Right. Oh, good. And not only is your body changing, but if we take the case of honoring your father and your mother, their bodies are
Their
changing.
bodies too, yeah.
How you honor, how you carry out mitzvot has a lot to do with physicality. How you don't do something has to do with the passage of time, right? Of that over time, I don't make idols. I don't worship over time. I don't lie over time. It's not lying or not gossiping is not physical, right? I mean, it may be physical. I have to stop myself from gossiping, but what it is, it's over time. I have to do this. I have to not do this.
But
Harry, looks like you're trying to say something.
I'm thinking that the negative commandments are our pushback against the Yetzer Hara. And the Yetzer Hara is there 24/7, every day, all the time. So that we need to be mindful of this constant tension day in and day out, year after year.
Good, that's good. Now, bringing in the Yetzer Hara is bringing in the rabbinic approach toward it and some of the mystical kind of approach. Yes, the Yetzer Hara is the manifestation of this kind of action that is constant on us to go the wrong way, to make the wrong choice, right? And it's there all the time, right? It's always there, and it's always something that we confront. And when you're dealing with stopping yourself from doing things that you might otherwise do, it isn't one time. It is always there. That presence is always there. That temptation is always there. Good.
Rabbi, when you speak about time, you're honoring your parents, but you're honoring them after their death as well. So that remembrance is probably one of the positive ones.
Well, the whole notion of how you honor, again, when the rabbis take a commandment like that, kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, they're going to expand that into all the different ways. How do you honor them when they are well? How do you honor them when they are sick? How do you honor them when they're no longer living? All of those, it doesn't say that you stop honoring them when they die.
Right.
Also doesn't say you honor them when they are good parents. I mean, there are all kinds of implications that the rabbis will examine. and that continues to be examined, about how do you honor a parent who wants to be cremated when our tradition says no? That's there, it's after their death, and our tradition says you don't do it, but that's their wish. Do you honor that? Do you honor, what if they've made some request of you at the end of your life that will hurt people? Do you honor that? How do you honor them? How do you balance it? Again, Judaism is about, the Hebrew term is yagia, struggle, sweat. It's hard if you take it seriously and you don't just take it on the surface. Okay, so let's look at Hamanuna, Rabbi Rav Hamanuna. He said, what scripture supports this? And he said, Moses commanded us the Torah as an inheritance. The word Torah, he uses numerology. So some of you know how to do this, gematria. Rabbi Davis loves this. Rabbi taught it to him, and he does it all the time. So Taf in Torah is 400. Vav is 6. Resh is 200. Hey is 5. What do we got?
I guess 613. I don't know.
No, we got 611. See it?
We're good in math.
But according to according to our tradition, he shows the first 2 commandments were actually delivered directly from God. And so they were in addition to those that given to Moses. So Moses was given 611 to give to us, but the 2 were given directly from God.
Okay.
I am God, and you shall have no other gods. Remember, it's not a commandment. It's a saying.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the Lord your God is the first saying, the first Amar. Any comments on that or thoughts?
Rabbi, I have one thought.
Roger.
When it says, you shall have no other gods before me,
Right.
When they're building the Ark of the Covenant, he tells them to put cherubs on top. And it's only mentioned one time. So essentially, there's a request to put a graven image on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And it's then you never hear about it again. I think I don't understand why that would have been requested.
Well, so I can't tell you why, but I can tell you how the rabbis deal with it. First of all, they want to know what are the faces of the cherubs. Where are they? What do they look like? They're very interested in the size, but they're also interested in what they look like. And they first of all, they face each other when God talks to the high priest. When the high priest is in there and God is speaking, if you will, or communicating, giving forgiveness, the 2 faces of the cherubs face each other. There are 2 traditions, rabbinic, at least 2 traditions about what their faces are. The face of one is an adult, a nondescript adult, meaning neither male nor female. And the other is a child, neither male nor female. So the love of, or the relationship of parent to child, the core of Revelation. The other is male and female. That at the core of loving each other by choice, not by genetics, that is marriage or love in a traditional sense, biblically, the faces of the cherubs, of these cherubs. Again, remember that our tradition did not say you could not depict things. You couldn't depict things that are symbols for God. The cherubs are not meant to be representations of God, than the ark is or than the commandments are. They are ritual items, but they are not meant to be God. Those cherubs are meant to represent an idea of what the revelation is about. It's about relationship.
Rabbi,
Yes, Marshall.
I'm not sure the source of this, but one interpretation of that, no other gods before me, is that the early Hebrews were monolatrous. That is, there were other gods, but this God is above them. And that eventually all the other gods were eliminated, so monolatry went away and you have monotheism. So there was a historical historical time before monotheism evolved. The Ten Commandments were necessary to say, yeah, there are all these other gods, but none shall be before me. I'm the chief God.
Right. No, that is the scholastic understanding. There's a book, I think it's called The Biography of God, where they take it through, but even scholastically, what does mi kamocha mean? Who is like you among the gods? I mean, there's a lot of that that we find in the Torah. You could interpret it different ways, but yes, scholars have said that first the Jewish people came up with the notion that their God was Adonai. Then theirs was the number one God of all other gods. Then their God was the exclusive God, and there are no other gods. And it was a process. Now, we don't know that. That's the theory of scholars. And obviously, it's not within the traditional Jewish understanding. But question is, what difference would it make? In a sense, it's sort of like, it's the same question I ask about what if we didn't have the Exodus from Egypt? Well, what difference does that make to me today? Our people have been observing it and getting lessons from it for a couple of thousand years, seem to think it's pretty important. I think it's pretty important. If it happened, I think that's wonderful. If it didn't happen, still got the lessons, still got the history, still relate to it. And in a sense, that's sort of about God as well, right? Whether God, whatever God is, or I don't relate, and I relate in the way that I relate and not the way you relate necessarily. So it could have been that God was first a tribal God, and then the head God, and then the only God. And I don't know, for me, it doesn't make a difference, but I can understand how it could. Other comments? Before we go on to the perplexed guy, Maimonides? Okay, so Maimonides mostly we talk about Maimonides, the Rambam, in his commentaries, in his Mishnah Torah, which is his take on the halacha. But he wrote this book called the Moreh Nevuchim, guide for this mixed up, the guide for those that are famished. That's the technical term. It's famished. So it's, he wrote it, we believe, for intelligent, learned Jews who were studying largely in Arabic and Spanish, the rise of the Greeks, and were learning about philosophy, and were questioning Judaism from the perspective of Greek and Roman and Arabic philosophy. And he was writing it in code. There's a lot about it that in order to understand the Guide for the Perplexed, that you have to really delve into. He says a lot of things that if you take them on the surface, they don't seem to make sense with his other writings. He wrote the other books for the average Jew. What do you do? Well, here's the Yad Chazakah, that's the Mishnah Torah, tells you what to do, tells you what the law is, you do it. But for the real thinkers that were questioning, he wrote this. So this is a section in part 3 where he's explaining about the mitzvot. And he says every one of the 613 precepts serves to inculcate some truth, to remove some erroneous opinion, to establish proper relations in society, to diminish evil, to train in good manners, or to warn against bad habits. So let's just take a minute and take that apart and see if we can come up with an example of each of these. So which mitzvah that you might be aware of is trying to give us a truth?
Studying. In other words, when it says to remove some erroneous opinion, you're supposed to be talking to others and learning back and forth, questioning. each
Okay,
other.
Talmud Torah.
Talmud Torah, right.
Okay,
Just
studying. Okay, what about removing an erroneous opinion?
Well, you should ask questions.
We need a mitzvah that's going to remove an erroneous opinion.
Mitzvah.
Means listen to the rabbis.
There's no mitzvah to listen to the rabbis. There's a tradition, but not a mitzvah. What, Johnny? Okay, Lashon Hara. It is a mitzvah.
It is.
Bearing false witness.
Bearing false witness, right? But you could do the ones we just did. Don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. It's erroneous opinion to use God's name in vain. Or you shall have no other gods beside me, right? Okay, how about establish proper relations in society? That's where I would put gossip, not being a gossip. But you could put others. What would you put there? Coveting. Joni said.
Stealing,
Stealing. Right, we got a lot of murder. We got a lot of these,
Oh, yes.
right? How about diminishing evil?
Don't murder, don't steal.
Right, all of these diminish evil. Tzedakah, you could say, diminishes evil by helping do good. Training good manners. What do we got for that?
Don't covet.
Okay,
Honoring your parents.
honoring your parents. Okay. And warning against bad habits. Well, of course, we've said a few.
All of them.
But he said all this depends on three things: opinions, morals, and social conduct. Now, what's missing in here for a religion? As Joni just said, faith.
Mm.
Right? All of the mitzvot, he's saying, are related to three things: opinions, morals, and social conduct. All right? And he's saying that it doesn't mean we know what each mitzvah means. He would argue there are many of them we know, but there are some we can't figure out. Like the red heifer, or my favorite, why milk and meat is okay in the cow. That's called a chidush. There's no logic in that. If they live together in the cow, they should live together outside the cow, but they don't. So there are some things we don't necessarily get, right? We do not count words because precepts, whether positive or negative, if they relate to speech, belong to those precepts which regulate our social conduct, or to those which spread truth, or those which teach morals. Thus, these three principles suffice in assigning a reason for every one of the divine commandments, even if we don't know what it is. Right? So remember, he's talking to people who are perplexed. He's talking to students that are questioning, and they may be questioning their faith. And he's saying faith is not what mitzvot are about. Mitzvot are about opinions, morals, and social conduct. It's about how we run a civilization, and how we keep cohesion within a society that doesn't live with each other. Remember, he's talking to us as Jews. We don't live on the land. We aren't a cohesive entity in the sense that we're in one place, right? We live all over the world. We live in different cultures with different languages. Our cohesion is all about trying to keep us together, and the mitzvot are there to help to make that happen. What do you think?
Rabbi, I think it sounds like a guide to survival. I think this is how we should act during this period of time, because that's the way you're going to survive here, through your social conduct. We have nothing else to relate to. There's nothing for us to do but act accordingly, act in good faith.
I would say, Roger, that's a very low bar. I think his bar is much higher. I think survival is a minimum, but I think he's looking for much more. I think he's looking for elevation toward truth, toward changing the world, toward making the, I mean, he really believes that in the core of all this is the method God has given us to make the world better. But yes, at core, there is the bottom line, the low bar. We need to survive, because without Jews in the world cannot get to the Messianic era. He would argue that for sure. I argue that as well.
Yeah.
Yes, Larry.
So could you spend a couple minutes on opinions? What is Maimonides saying about opinions? I understand morals and social conduct. Are opinions ideas that are generated by the community?
Well, and so take a mitzvah, like what is the opinion? What are the opinions that come out of Shabbat rest? About 6 days shall you work, and on the 7th day you shall do no labor. What opinions come out of that?
I'm not sure the definition.
Well, the word in Hebrew is dea, which is opinion or knowledge. It's argued knowledge, but it's points of view. Deot. Marshall?
Maybe you could say it's related to the stories that we tell. The opinions are how we make sense, how a given person or makes sense out of the world. The mitzvot are one way of organizing what your opinion is, what your story is about how the world should be, how it was, how I can make it better. Those are all meaningful stories. They're not scientific facts.
Right. Or take a mitzvah like love your neighbor as yourself. Or, right, there are out of that, it's saying something about your view of others, right? That there is equity between you and others. Then it takes us back to created in the image of God, that we view the world, that we view human beings as created in a special way, that we believe that humans all have souls. I mean, opinions flow out of mitzvot. And mitzvot are meant to generate opinions, right? It's not just, so a mitzvah doesn't give you an opinion, but it's meant to generate an opinion, a view of the world. That's one of the explanations. Remember, he's not saying I know all of how it applies to every mitzvah, but that's what we see. They all have truth in them. They all come out and give us some sense of morals, some sense of truth, and some sense of social conduct if we search through them. That's why they were given. Right? So the whole point of looking at mitzvot this way is to say a number of things. One, mitzvot are at the core of Jewish tradition and religion, right?
Right.
Cannot understand a Judaism without some sense of mitzvot. Even Reform has had to define mitzvot. We define it differently than the Orthodox, but we have to wrestle with it because you cannot have Judaism without mitzvot. In a sense, you can have Christianity without mitzvot. There are expectations vis-a-vis the church and vis-a-vis faith, but they are not mitzvot, they're requirements. If you did none of the 613 mitzvot, right?
Mhm.
And you're born a Jew, you're still a Jew. We dealt with that in our last class, right? You're still a Jew. You're a
Yes.
living Jew. You're not a good Jew by Jewish standards, but you're a Jew. But the mitzvot were given, according to Maimonides, with the notion that it would give us purpose, truth, and a way of relating to each other in a positive way and creating society. And that's why they were given. But they are at the core of Judaism. And therefore, anyone who is Jewish who takes it seriously has to wrestle with mitzvot, what they mean. Well, Marshall started by the notion of who gave these things. You know, where you could say that's the mitzvah. Who is the commander?
Mhm.
And that's the question that we each have to answer. Who is the commander? And maybe it's satisfying to many people, and I think it is, to say our people commanded it out of their history. They came up with this, or Moses came up with this, or later the prophets added to it. I don't, for me, don't see it that way. I think there's too much in it that I don't see a human being in antiquity as coming up with. That just doesn't make sense. The whole idea of letting the land lie fallow for a year every 7 years, or returning property back to its original owners after every 50 years. I mean, there are things in there that nobody came up with in the ancient world, and no human being would have even ventured it. No one's doing it today. No one would say it. Even when you got to socialism, they never said it. You know, you stop working for a year, depend only on God and nature. You get back land to everybody who originally had it 50 years ago. It's crazy. Even the notion of Shabbat was considered crazy in the ancient world. One of the major accusations of Jews in the Greek and Roman Empire was that we were lazy because we demanded 1 day a week off. That showed to them that we were not, we saw ourselves as totally different than everyone else, and we were lazy. We said, no, 1 day we don't work. It was a union, right? It was our contract. Nobody else had it. And I have to say, most of the world still doesn't observe it, including most Jews. All right, so this is the beginning of our discussion. Next week, we're going to look at intention, kavanah, about the intention of how we carry out mitzvot and what that means and how does it matter. Okay?
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
you.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you all very much.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
Rabbi.
Boker tov, boker tov.
Boker.
Okay.
Lila tov, lila tov, lila tov, lila tov.
Yeah, it's dark outside my window.
It sure is.
Yeah, all right.
Okay.
That was wonderful.
Okay.
Rabbi, I kept